Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. Today's show features Jan Christopher Arp, founder and director of FormFintech. Jan was introduced to me by a mutual acquaintance, Ben Tuff, and we had a great conversation about all things fintech. He's passionate about improving the financial well-being of society with financial services. He also built FormFintech as well as the Holt Accelerator AI, which we get into in a little bit, really solving the problems of the financial industry with AI and blockchain specifically. He coaches fintechs in the startup phase with the aim of reaching their next phase of development. For the past 2 years, Jan has helped some 20 startups raise over 15 million in funding. On the show, we spoke about how he left the world of big company finance to go into the startup world, the launch of his new accelerator, Holt Accelerator AI, the recent partnership that he announced with Strategy AI. We spoke about the iconic Sir Herbert Holt, which is one of the most well-known Montreal business people, and the Holt family, his passion for building a community, and some of the key areas in the fintech stack. Jan is a key person in the Montreal startup community, and he's on the path to building a great accelerator. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. Jan, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me. This is fantastic.
It's a pleasure meeting you. I appreciate you taking the time. And maybe I want to start with a quick intro question. Is how did you get into the startup scene?
Yeah, it's a good question. How does anyone kind of fall into that? I myself was a consultant working on behalf of investment banks doing due diligence transactions for the satellite industry, so sort of billion-dollar transactions. Not exactly where I wanted to be though. And so after 5 years, I started making the pivot back, and I actually went to school. Who would have thought by doing an MBA that you would end up in the startup world from there? Oh,
wow. Okay. So you were doing like big M&A deals for big telcos, like billion-dollar kind of things. And then you decided to go back and do an MBA.
Yeah, I was looking, I didn't know exactly where I was going to fall, but I knew that I wanted to approach the startup ecosystem, and naturally you think, oh, maybe that's going to be VC world, right? And so in doing so, MBA is a time to explore and play. And very fortunate, we got, a great education system here in Montreal. So went to HEC, and from there just used that time to get involved as many startups as possible, roll up the sleeves, get the hands dirty. So I started consulting for them on their behalf, and then it sort of guided me in the direction that it was today.
What were you consulting on exactly?
I'd actually worked with a couple startups, early stage. One of them didn't have a name at the time, eventually became Share the Bus, and eventually became Bus.com. So that was a good success story for Montreal. So I got to work with them from before they incorporated all the way to Series A. And I still think they're, a rock star, a rocket ship, a rocket bus on the way.
Rocket bus. Yeah, I know Kyle a little bit over there. And yeah, they're doing some amazing things right now.
Yeah. So those are some of the examples. And then over time, I got pulled into this new incubator that I just launched out of Concordia. It was District 3. And so they said, hey, we're looking for a sort of finance guy to accelerate these teams. We have a big backlog of teams that need to raise money. So I just kind of picked them off one by one and helped them, raise from anywhere from pre-seed to seed round funds.
How important how important was your finance background at this stage? I imagine that a lot of the early stage companies you're dealing with didn't even know how to spell finance, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a good point. And so you range from breaking down the basics of what's a cash flow statement and how to set that up using, basic Excel tools, to, more advanced as we started going into due diligence. The skill set that I required needed to be adapted as such. So when you're doing due diligence for big companies, we're working with, 100 pages of due diligence decks, right? And we're looking at historical figures, and we're building massive and combing through Excel models of client information in this case to make sure it all adds up, really vetting the customers in this case. When you flip to the startup world, it was a little bit interesting. It comes down to slide deck, 12 slides, a big vision, right? A lot of things that could be, right? There's less of the meat there, more focus on the team who's there. So that took a little bit of an adjustment at first, but eventually, you sort of figure out how the differences of the two worlds are.
And then, so what made you want to jump in further You know, in the sense of you're doing some consulting, you're finishing your MBA. What makes you decide to jump with both feet at that point?
I was just loving the ride. You felt like every time that you made a decision or recommendation and then it was taken, the impact was so large. It just felt, and as much as I did big ones where there's billions of dollars at stake, I just felt slightly removed from it versus like being right in it with the entrepreneurs who it almost feels like life or death for them. It actually felt like the stakes were higher, even though it's significantly less money. So it's one of those things that I realized that this makes me very happy and I gotta, continue to do it, and play in the space.
It's an interesting point. So it's like when you're working in the big corporate world, like even though it's hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, people are still kind of disconnected because it's still a job versus, a young entrepreneur that's, for him or her, this is like their life right now, right?
Yeah.
So it ends up being a lot more personal. And like you said, you can have a much greater impact on them at that point.
Yeah. And also the higher returns that could potentially be. So sure, it was in the billions of dollars at the time, but these companies are aiming to be there. And, at first it's just growth projections and pieces of paper. But when you're actually fortunate enough to see companies start to put those, paper into action and start to see some of those metrics come true en route to that sort of direction, it's a really an amazing feeling.
So fast forward a little bit in the future. So now you have two accelerators you're spending a lot of your time on with a specific focus on fintech. Mm-hmm. Why fintech? Why that particular field?
Yeah, it could be that I'm just trying to justify my existence in finance for so long. And so now I need to find a way to say finance is good for the rest of the world. See, everyone get behind it. I do believe that actually. So, but I won't go down that path just yet. But what happened was if we go around that time when I was in the startup ecosystem, I was always finding ways of how do I, automate anything financial related basically. And so that could be as, bookkeeping, for instance, and accounting, right? And how do I make my life easier in this case? Maybe I'm a little lazy and I don't like doing accounting. That's why. But I started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel going, wow, there's so much further that we can go for not this just field, but any field, within finance. And so at the same time, I realized there was no ecosystem here. And we started, even before the term existed, I was interested in it. But then this new word of fintech started to emerge. And so around that time, 3 years ago, we had nothing. Nothing existed. So I kind of said, I'm going to start seeing what we can do. Let's start animating the ecosystem. Let's see what kind of sticks. Let's see what kind of engagement. And I tested some things, actually. I tested, a first program I ever ran was during my time at District 3, and I invited 10 fintechs from across Montreal's ecosystem. And I said, okay, we'll have a selection thing and we'll choose the top 3. And then we put them through a coaching program over 10 weeks. And we put them on the stage. And these fintechs were early, but they were very cool. There was Milo at the time, right? Which was Bank Me back then. Yeah. There was Payment Rails as well, and Squares Union. And so we put them on this stage, and we invited Shadi Habib, the CTO of Desjardins, to give a keynote to kind of see what the corporate engagement was already and get their feedback. And what I felt in that room was a lot of energy and a lot of interest. And I could tell from the top, I believed in the words of Shadi saying, we need to start aligning our rowboats and we need to start rowing in the right direction collectively. And so that kind of kicked it and sparked, my beliefs as well, and realizing this is the right track. And it's amazing to look back and see, 3 years later, these rocket ships as well that are taking off of those same teams. Fortunately, all those 3 teams are still doing quite well and have made strides since then.
That's amazing. And so what led you to starting FormFintech?
So that was the first one that we started. I started seeing that there was no one as focused on the community and the grassroots movement that we needed here. And the community side of things sometimes gets overlooked. And maybe it's because the unit economics are a little more challenging to make it work. And so you're dependent on, and I don't like this word, sponsors, but people who come in very early stage. And so you still have to find a way to give them value in this case. And so we started doing that, and we ran a bunch of, building off of the existing programs, and we just started putting feelers out into the community and see who was getting excited. And the excitement level was always there. We started doing education platforms, so we have full-day blockchain boot camps and algo trading events so people can play with their hands with artificial intelligence, because how do you play with artificial intelligence in finance, right? We wanted the hands-on experience. Then we started doing things like, well, how can we get people really to form teams? We're short on them. So we started these things called like formathons, for instance, and we invited big financial institutions. We're actually in our second year, and we got like Banque Nationale and Desjardins. And anyways, they gave us challenges, and the community would come, those that we just trained, and they would try and solve those particular problems. And we put them through these design thinking sort of style structures. We bring in world-class experts, and we started to see, what would come out of it. And actually some teams incorporated and raised pre-seed funding and went on to deliver an MVP. And so when we started doing that, I was like, wow, this recipe is actually working. And maybe there is a way to monetize or at least have a business model that's sustainable, right? Like, cause it's a non-profit essentially. And so we started having just a lot of fun in the space and realizing that there's a lot of challenges out there, a lot of work to do, but a necessary cause because, as we know, 50% of the jobs are about to be changed or replaced by bots in this case. And so we need to start training that next talent and building the next solutions for that.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few things, and I find interesting going back just the business model. So you said you're a nonprofit, but how do you keep the lights on?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're always having to look at that and make sure that we have the right partners in to support us. I mean, that's been key. Like any startup, the key is delivering value right from the start. And so it goes beyond logos on a page, for instance. So when we first launched our flagship event, the Formathon, we had invited players like Desjardins and AMF and Valtech. And we said, we're going to help you solve your challenges, right? Which sounds a little crazy at first because we're going to leverage the community to do so. So this idea of open innovation, it's not as common here in Montreal, but it's increasingly getting so. And we said, hey, by doing this, you're going to build a great brand and you're going to recruit top talent because we're testing them. We're going to tell you, you're going to motivate your staff. Your staff wants to do this. I'm telling you, you probably have a couple black sheep within your organization that comes up with ideas who aren't getting heard. This is their chance to shine. We're going to give you a bunch of research, believe it or not. They're going to do and go in the fields and they're going to give you information about it. And it's going to be in an accelerated fashion. And it's going to be significantly cheaper in-house. And hey, you know what? You might just get a solution to your problem. We're going to try and develop something while we go. So we made this kind of program that allowed them to hit multiple kind of areas of value, and it spoke differently to different institutions in this case. So that was kind of the main thing that we banked on. But throughout that time, we've had key sponsors, and so some of them included District 3, who believed in my kind of crazy ideas from the beginning, and that's important. Someone who can sponsor you when you're just an idea and a pen and paper and saying this is the direction we want to go. The government eventually came in as well, and that was a huge one. The MESI, Ministère économique, sciences et innovation, really proud of the direction they're taking to support Quebec entrepreneurship. And so it's been a huge catalyst for a lot of the programs that are happening here. And other parties who've been interested, who've supported us, like Finance Montréal, where it's kind of their focus area to expand finance and look at fintech.
What's been your biggest learning in the past 3 years since you've been running FormFintech?
Yeah, one thing I guess I didn't envision that was going to be a big load of my time is, I guess one way, either way to say it is politics, right? And so how do I navigate and not step on people's toes? How do I do this in the right way that we properly build it, that we can all paddle together in the right direction? And so when you're creating these sort of value propositions and everyone wants it for different reasons, it gets challenging to navigate it into one solution, and that solution being FormFintech, that solution being the type of programs that we ran. And so that was a bit of a shift. I didn't realize that was the role that I'd have to play. And so learning how to navigate that has been, I guess, my biggest learning so far. So
give us a sense of the scale today. Like how many companies do you run every year? And what kind of funding does an average company get once they're done?
Right. So a lot of it's very, very early stage. To give you some numbers, we FormFintech, and this is where we are. We got fortunate for the next piece, which is the accelerator I'll talk about after. But FormFintech worked with about 100 or so fintechs. And we either form them from nothing, right? And a lot of it is sometimes just education and training. So for those next series of entrepreneurs who actually get plugged. And so I looked at some of the numbers last year. We actually had created about 25 jobs, which is early stage for our first year sort of running. Not too bad, right? But when we also looked at the amount of fintechs that were created, we're also starting to see it's challenging for us to take credit for all that because the later stage entrepreneurs they do it themselves. We just try and give them a little boost, right? So it's hard to say, like Milo has been able to raise $3.5 million, and he's done that because he's a rock star, and he's done that because he's worked closely with strong players like FCP. We played a tiny little role in the beginning of his journey of, assisting him with a pitching event to get the name out so that, he could practice the pitch and meet a bunch of people in the community. So it's hard to kind of
quantify the impact.
In some cases, and it's a good question because people ask us this, like especially if you're a government, right? What is the impact that we create?
Outside of, I can imagine you wear a few hats there. Like one of the responsibilities, it sounds like, is getting sponsors, working with larger players. How do you get entrepreneurs aware of what you guys do and then get them on board, right? Like would-be, let's say, entrepreneurs, because there's people I imagine that are still young. Maybe it's the first time they do this. So there's a lot of coaching involved. So curious, how do you get people to jump on board?
Yeah, so you're referring more specifically to the leaders and the people who would participate as future entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great question. We're actually in the midst of seeing if we can hire someone dedicated, like a fintech scout, either someone who's responsible for the fintechs or individuals. Our series of events that we run do just that. And so we either lead them or we co-create them. And so we'll run Intro to Fintechs, and I'll do this at every single university. And I'll do that at the beginning of the year, for instance. And it's open to professionals, and I hope they do come. And I want to start disseminating and demystifying what is fintech, right? What does that mean? And so we start talking about how technologies play into it in the industries and how to get engaged, basically. But then we move over into these sort of full day workshops, and that's where we mentioned the idea of the algo training, the blockchain boot camp, and I like playing with these different technologies. And it's been great feedback. They usually love those type of experiences. And so we partner with those. We need these sort of events to keep the momentum going. I don't think we actually have enough. So we play our part where we lead some. We'll throw the party, but every now and then we'll join a party where possible. And that's where we find people, because it's a very easy way to test them. If just them showing up at a Sanka set is indicative of someone's character, right? Some people work the 9-to-5s, and that's fine, but others are looking to advance their professional careers. And just by coming out to these type of things, you can tell a lot, let alone tracking their performance in a full day workshop.
So let's switch to your other hat then. So let's talk about Holt. So how did that come about? I know it's a relatively new venture, so just curious to get your thoughts on the inception story.
Yeah. Very, very lucky, I would say. But I think sometimes, some would argue that, you
have to be lucky to be good. You have to be good to be lucky, as you say, right? So.
Or work, just keep working hard until something happens, right? So fortunately through the time I was able to stumble into the great grandson of Sir Herbert Holt. And I hadn't heard of Sir Herbert Holt before, actually. He was one of Montreal's pioneers in entrepreneurship and business development here in the late 1800s. And so he had built things like the light, heat, and power company of Quebec, which got expropriated back to Quebec, becoming Hydro-Quebec, right? So the largest hydro, or one of the largest hydro producers in the world. He had about 300 companies under his name locally and internationally, and he was the longest-serving chairman of RBC, right? So he made it become into the largest in Canada and third largest in North America. So that family, right, hundreds of years of financing experience and entrepreneurships, they're constantly building their businesses. That great-grandson, Brendan, has been investing in tech startups, and he's investing in accelerators. He previously invested with the Adidas family, and they did a sports accelerator, and he loved it. And so just very good timing. He's going, I want to do my own accelerator. And what do I know? I know finance. I know entrepreneurship. I like tech. I'm doing fintech. Mm-hmm. And so he says he wants to give back to where it all started for them and their family. And so he said, I want to give back to the Montreal ecosystem. And so when he told me this, I said, that's fantastic. This is amazing. How can I be a part of it? And I was just very fortunate that, the activities that I've been building, this was the obvious next step. This is the flip from this nice community play that we're doing, where we're finding and scouting and helping build those next levels of entrepreneurs to these are legit businesses. We're going to invest in them, and we're going to grow them, and we're going to scale them, and we're going to think international at this point. And so it's just another level. It's sort of kind of growing up, and very fortunate that, we were able to align together on the right vision. So, yeah.
So explain in detail, like, how does that accelerate? First of all, amazing story. Like, I know the street hold, and then researching our conversation, it's like, oh, okay. So there's this family that basically built the city and built Hydro-Quebec, that I think doesn't have enough recognition, if you ask me. So how does this accelerator exactly function, and what stage are you at in terms of your go-to-market?
Yeah. So we've kicked off. It all happened incredibly fast, and that's why I love working with these guys. We don't, we mean business, and we're here to move as fast as possible. So I actually officially joined April 26th. That was our demo day for the Ascension program. So I made the announcement.
Not even a month.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And during that time, it's been already a whirlwind. We started raising the round for the Holt Accelerator. The round was over before I could finish the pitch deck. I'd never had something like that experience before, and I was, racing to build it, but I'm meeting just next level of sort of investors and advisors that would have taken me years to meet. So it's been an accelerator for myself personally. And then, and again, it was, we had closed the round, we hadn't even incorporated, so now we're rushing to incorporate as well. And so it's all coming in, that's great. And then very quickly it shifted to the application process. And so how it works is we'll seek 400 applicants from around the world, right? And we're going to be leveraging all the key advisors that are in. We already have about 50 or so, and we're growing those numbers daily. And looking into the key areas where, yes, there's the top fintechs around the world, right? And so it's the New Yorks, the Silicon Valleys, and the Londons, and the Singapores, et cetera. But also other lower tier 2 markets as well, where some of us might not be so familiar with the type of activities they have. And just pulling them in and seeing, what we'll do thereafter is a selection day. So we'll invite the top 30. And it's going to be great. It's going to be in Montreal. We're going to invite all the advisors there. We're going to be a big day, of 2 days actually, and we're going to scout them. And we're going to say, okay, which ones are the most interesting for you, the advisors, right? Which ones we have our customers there? Which ones are we most likely to get? Are you going to use this technology, right? Which ones could we potentially invest in? Get them in front of customers. We want to broker these deals for them. And then, like anything, we'll get their feedback, triangulate that, and then we'll choose the top 10. So the program kicks off in September, then officially, and runs for more or less 3 months. But we'll allow it to go a little further, dependent on the biggest thing, how long it takes them to close a deal with their customer. And that customer being a big financial institution, that customer is the ever elusive one, especially in the fintech space. Very challenging to work with these big guys. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, the sales cycle is super long, right?
Super long, and they generally don't come in necessarily this early. And so, Series A is kind of there as it gets. So we're going a little bit earlier. And most of them are just only now realizing that, hey, wait, we can partner with fintechs. We can be this sort of ecosystem for which we have these apps, right, that we connect into. They leverage our data, new growth opportunities, new growth channels for us.
Besides being specialized in fintech, what's the differentiator? What will make someone apply to Holt and not Founder Fuel or some other accelerator? Yeah,
it's a great question. In fact, we're in discussions with the Founder Fuels and the great jobs they do there. In fact, actually the earliest company I alluded to was Share the Bus. One of the first tasks I was tasked with was helping them get into the Founder Fuel.
Nice.
So it's cool how things we're always connected here. So we actually see ourselves as complementary. There isn't enough supply mechanisms to handle the demand that's out there, right? And so just to give you an example, if you have 400 applicants around the world, you're selecting, 10 or so. Well, you could bet yourself that the other 20 or 30 or, that you said no to are pretty strong candidates. So that's already this spillover effect. And that's unfortunate then, because we missed out on that for Montreal. We should have been placing more bets. We should have been bringing in. So that's one area. But another piece is, so fintech, I don't want to downplay how the uniqueness of it. It comes with its own challenges. It comes with its own traction channels, for instance. And so it's not just like, this is how you sell. This is who you sell to. This is how this person thinks. This is what they're motivated by. Go talk to them. This is how we're going to position this, right? It's how you approach regulations, right? That's one of the other biggest elephants in the room when it comes to development in this case. And so how you go about developing your prototypes or MVPs are going to be different. And so you need to be aware of this to accelerate the pace at which you grow, right? So the fintech piece is key. Another piece is, we've been very fortunate to partner with Strategy AI. And so it's a world-class AI lab right here in Montreal. And so they have a full stack of PhDs who are just ready to work on these fintech related problems. So they'll be part of this sort of impact team. We'll have an impact team who works with the teams weekly, coaching them, moving them, vetting that technology, make sure it's good, and they can access that those scientists whenever they need. And probably lastly is also, I'm sure a lot of them do it well, but from our side is all the work through FormFintech in the sense that we can leverage that community, right? And so finding talent is very challenging. And for me to place people as a matchmaker when you're looking at FormFintech is also very challenging. So now we have this new mechanism, these new teams who are able to find good talent, which they deserve in the earliest stages. So I'd say there's probably those three core differentiators. I could say the mentor network, but everyone's going to boast the mentor network, and everyone has a different and strong mentor network. So I'm not going to, and not one. I think they're all good. Don't get me wrong. Well, not all of them, but there are one. Yeah. They're strong.
So if we fast forward 12 months from now, what would be your definition of success for Hold?
Yeah.
What would it look like?
Yeah. So we're just kicking off right now, right? And so we're heavy in the development mode, but we would have launched at that point our first cohort, and then we would have had our 10 teams, and we would have closed the rounds for several of them, right? Usually, let's say minimum half, right? That's the goal that you're looking for. And then how might we thereafter look into the next year's? We'll be doing our second cohort, so we'll be knee deep in the middle of our second application process. So that would be the easy answer. The longer answers are questions that we'll need to explore. And so, international development and other players that we're working with, and can we bring this in other areas as well? So I'll keep that vague for now, just because I want to explore. Like, it's still in the, we still have to prove ourselves in this first cohort before we get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, exciting. It's exciting. It sounds like you guys are building what you're trying to be is the leading fintech accelerator in the country, if not broader than that.
Yeah.
And you have backing of. You have obviously the capital, it sounds like, and you're starting to bring in the technical expertise. So now all you're missing is basically building the product and getting people to apply and getting them launched. It's very, very honorable effort, I have to say. For maybe to zoom out and talk about fintech specifically, and maybe just in this market, how do you see fintech having evolved over the past few years? Right, it went from being this obscure thing to everyone now, including big banks, are heavily investing, and it still feels embryonic. It still feels like the way most user transactions work are the same they were 5-10 years ago. Right, maybe you have a better mobile app, and maybe you have a tap. Pay pass on your credit card, but fundamentally still the same underlying infrastructure. So I'd like to pick your brain on how you see it evolving.
It's great questions. I'm thinking, fintech, as we said, didn't really exist as a word until 3-5 years ago. Arguably, you can say around the time PayPal came in is when the first fintech, but when did we coin the term? So a bunch of people who were fintechs didn't even realize they were fintechs. And that was like a Thinking Capital, for instance, that just recently got acquired for $200 million by Purpose Capital, right? And say, hey, we didn't even know we're a fintech. I'm like, of course you're a fintech, right? But, that time, we've seen a lot of transition. So it went from introduction of the word fintech to fintechs are going to eat and cannibalize all the market opportunity for corporates to we're going to start collaborating, we're going to work with them. And that took some time to transition, because when I was, even now and then, I still meet the odd person who says fintechs are weird, we compete with them, I don't want to work with them. So, but that is shifting. We are seeing now increasing interest to better work with the fintechs, and I'm talking about real tangible deals. I'm talking acquisitions, leveraging, incorporating this technology into their systems, right? There's this big ones that's been announced. Even most recently, we can announce MindBridge and National Bank was the most recent example that was happened, and that's huge, and for fintech in Canada, for that matter. And so what we're seeing is that starting to increase, And what we're hoping for and believing and betting on is that's only going to accelerate. And they're setting up their systems and processes so that they can do more of this more quickly. And so I'm betting on the fact that's part of the thesis, I guess you can say, that this idea of like being an ecosystem, right? And attaching to them, all these fintechs to have better serve ultimately, your customers. So that doesn't just mean about working with, the biz dev process and making sure the cultures work. It's a whole data question. And this becomes a very big topic on how to structure these massive data sets that don't necessarily talk to each other. They're all in different silos. And so how can we make it so it's all nice and clean and you can just plug into one simple API? Then you start saying, well...
So, sorry, by data set, you mean the data set that a bank would have?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, correct. Which is technically your data.
Yeah.
And so then we start asking questions, who owns that data and who has rights to access it? And what we've seen in Europe, right, several years in advance in many cases, is that they're passing, PSD2, which basically says you have the right to say who gets access to your data. And that's actually now into effect, and we're going to see how that happens and occurs, what that means for the rest of Canada. But you can already, bet on the fact that banks are equipping themselves internally to be at least prepared for that sort of notion. The question being, should this be driven and it's competition? They should naturally do this because it's just better off, or should the regulators take the step to do so? That's the questions we're asking in Canada. So we'll see what happens there. But I did want to jump back. You did touch a good point of what does that mean for the consumer, right? Ultimately, have we actually seen massive advancements in terms of what we're getting? It's a good point. I think we've seen in Canada, we are a bit of a laggard in terms of technology development. And that's not just in fintech. That's in other industries, I'm sure you saw. And there could be a couple of reasons for it. But what we definitely see in the fintech side is customer adoption is lower. Like we're looking at last reports, it's a little outdated, but they haven't changed it, about 18%. Versus, I think the European numbers are potentially in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken, and numbers in China are closer to like 50%, right? And so part of that's on us as a consumer. It's apathy. We don't care. We're not trying to use these new apps, and at the same time, the new apps have struggled to come in because of the ability to plug into the existing data sets, because of the massive financial institutions that are like being able to access that data, or the existing regulations that we have. So, but we're starting to see this interesting time where it's shifting, and we've seen new players like Flinks emerge, which basically allows you to get access to that banking data now. And so as long, you can plug into it, and it's still the consumer saying, I grant access, but now they can go in and access your bank's data so that that particular fintech can give you the service for which you requested. This is going to make life easier. And this is where we're sort of seeing that there's way more to go. And so if you look in other places around the world, they are using definitely way more technologies to serve their financial needs. And I only see that as increasing here in Canada.
What do you see in the space that's evolving, that you're spending time on, that you're reading up upon, that you're excited about, be it a consumer trend or a technical trend?
Yeah. So the first parts I've already mentioned, so I won't stay on that anymore. So let's maybe shift over some other things that I find interesting. Always trying to keep on top of what are happening in whether it be the different technology spaces. And so you could look at blockchain, for instance, and where is the direction this is happening. So the big ICO bubble has been, got pretty big. We're starting to see that it's kind of slowing a bit in terms of the amounts that are occurring, but still ever present. Now, is this something that's investable? I won't put a statement on that per se, but I think what we will see is that at least 1% of these sort of cryptocurrencies are going to stick around. But what's most important is the underlying technology of blockchain, which I find fascinating. And we're barely scratching the surface, and we're at like the earliest days, and it's so the energy is there, a lot of intellectual people, the debates that are happening around it, and the direction it's going to take, and the use cases for it. And so for me, it's the idea of what some would call the internet 2.0. So at least staying abreast on that and trying to figure out where that's going to land. That's a lot of fun for me. Of course, anything artificial intelligence, right? But that's any industry. Well, some would argue it's health first and then finance. And I mean, ultimately finance is nothing but a set of data. So of course, artificial intelligence makes a lot of sense in this case. So curious to see where this all goes, but ultimately, is it just a sprinkle of AI or is it fully embedded within it? Ultimately, anything fintech tech will include AI. I think that's kind of the rumor that any sort of startup, if they're a tech startup, it'll be synonymous, the word AI and tech. And I think that'll be never more true than what we've seen in the financial space. So always looking at that. And then, of course, the marriage of different technologies is always super interesting to me. And so these are just two, but we can go and talk about a bunch of others. But blockchain, you have a database, right? And the other is the algorithms to that database, right? That seems like a perfect marriage. Yeah. So the intersection of those, and so it may become interesting.
It's interesting, yeah. It's very interesting. It sounds like, we're both fans of just understanding blockchain and looking into it. Like you said, the excitement and it all depends. If you follow people on crypto Twitter, it's this Nexus black hole that's either super entertaining or the worst thing ever. I'm undecided on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's interesting. So in terms of how you invest or how you're not maybe invest, but what kind of companies you're looking to form, pun intended, I guess, would be either at a infrastructure layer, so people that are building, let's say, the next pipes, that would be Internet 2.0, as you said, or maybe more consumer facing that would liaise with existing data sets from customers, right? So kind of at that level, right? So you're agnostic as to where in the value chain the fintechs play in, if I understand correctly. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's correct. And then you can almost argue, well, where do you focus at all? Because that sounds like everything under the world. Fintech can be a pretty broad definition. So we do try and focus on the key areas of what would be within the financial industry. But it becomes very challenging. And I do want to touch on this point because, I always ask the question, who owns the customer journey? And as we're seeing very, very quickly, things are the line between, for instance, health and finance. And so that's insurance and preventative health, right? Who should take ownership of that? And then build associated products around those lines. And so if you only stayed in your finance bubble and the fintech world, you might overlook those opportunities. And so I think we have to be open-minded. And that's sometimes where I challenge the financial world is I think we need to be a bit more visionary and that's where I already alluded, things between technologies are merging and we have to be prepared for that. Things between industries are going to be blending together and we have to see what kind of creations come out of that. But bringing it back to a more simple answer, we just want to find the top fintechs that we can support and serve. And so that comes back to our advisors and our partners. And they say, hey, I can be a customer to this. I want to be an investor. I know a bunch of people. I can support them heavily. I can scale them. Then we can make those bets accordingly.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Jan, I wish you continued success with Holt and looking forward to hearing more about you guys. Where can people find more information about what you're doing on FormFintech or Holt or anything personally?
Yeah. So you can check out holtaccelerator.com/apply for all the fintechs out there right now. I had to definitely do that plug. And if you want to just get involved in the community, just check out formfintech.com and always looking for top talent to get engaged.
Awesome. Thanks for your time.
Cool. Thanks so much, Nectar.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.